Today in our Liberating Conversation series, we're talking with a business strategist and great facilitator, Alan Scott.
And Alan is the principal and director of Osmosis, based out of Brisbane, here in Queensland. We're coming from the Sunshine Coast studio, and he's going to guide us through some strategies that business owners can employ to realise more of what they want in their life and in their business. Alan also has a background as a partner at Deloitte, but about 8 years ago, he chose to leave that kind of world to be able to be with business owners in the deep and sometimes challenging parts of their journey. So if you're a business owner or someone that works inside a big organisation, there's something in this for you. Tune in.
So what are some of the pain points that people would experience before they engage you, Alan? Like, talk to us about that, because, you know, what we want to do is really connect those listeners who are in business, either business people or, you know, sitting inside a company frustrated because they can't make progress or scale, or something's happening that they're stuck. Like, is that something that you take care of? And if it is, can you tell a few war stories that will connect people into your story?
If I can break that down into two answers, and I suppose the answers are the business owners and the larger businesses. And the larger businesses, I suppose, is a little bit easier in a solution sense, because at some point they've recognised to get change happening, they need someone to drop in. That's the pain point. We haven't been able to do it ourselves, or the conversation is being halted or paused by somebody internally. But if we had someone come in to facilitate the conversation, so a lot of what I do is facilitation. If someone comes in and facilitates a conversation with the inputs for everybody, you generally get to an output that you wouldn't have got through if someone owned it internally. So the pain point for those guys particularly is that we're either stalled, we need someone to come in with different thinking, we need someone just to simply manage the conversation as a not invested person in it. And I suppose that's the thing I love about facilitation, because as a facilitator, it's the process you own, not necessarily the content, in my opinion. The content comes from the wonderful people around the table, but the process of facilitation draws that content out and gets them to an outcome. With the business owners, quite often the pain point that you start with is time. They haven't got time. They haven't got time to go on a holiday. They haven't got time to step back and think about where the business wants to be. They're not investing the right sort of, or what they believe is the right sort of time with their kids or with their families. So quite often that time is because either the business is in a growth spurt, or that they're invested way too much in the detail of the business. And part of what my process is trying to get them to recognize that and pull them up. Because from a strategy perspective, the classic, you know, on your business versus in your business. And quite often it takes someone to keep highlighting that for someone and recognizing it for someone to truly understand what that looks like. And quite often a pain point is, even when you work with them and they've got these things that they want to do from a strategic perspective, day one after that, they're back in the minutia, unless you're dealing with that, unless you're saying, look, surely delegation is another pain point. You've got quite often a lot of business owners that are just, I can't delegate that, because if I delegate it, I've got to train someone to do it, and I've got to spend time. It'd be quicker for me to do it myself. So it's quite often a short-term view. Whereas if they then invest the time to train the person, it's something that's off their plate, and they can focus on something else. So the pain points generally are time, and particularly where I focus is understanding where the family unit wants to be, or even if it's just a couple, where the couple wants to be. Ensuring that vision's in place. And in my belief, most private businesses need to be supporting where they want to be from an individual's perspective. And a lot of people I talk to haven't had that conversation amongst themselves. So there's a business up here on the Sunshine Coast. Great business, great couple, and I help them actually set a vision for themselves. And the gentleman involved in that was a little bit hesitant in doing it, but came out of it saying, look, it was just a great conversation to sit down and work out where he and his wife actually wanted to be together going forward, and therefore what the business needed to do. And we looked at it from 2020 to 2030, so a 10-year window, and set a vision for them being skiing nomads around the world, and the business needs to get them there. So it's this what I love to sort of flesh out is this linkage between where you need to be or want to be personally and what your personal and family vision is and what the business can do.
So that's great. That's a great opener, but there's a lot of meat between, where you started to respond to my question and where you ended up, which was more into the future. But if we can just return back to, so you've articulated that time and delegation is some of the pain points, and you've articulated that well, I think. But how do people experience that? Like, how do people in the business experience having no time, not delegating, having to take on everything themselves? Like, what's their experience and how does that impact other team members?
Could I add a interpretation? I think what you're saying is sometimes, and as I'll speak as a business owner, you don't recognise that time is the issue. There are other things that present, like a frustration or
and multiple things.
And we're wondering what you see as the presenting challenges, behind which obviously you can say, hey, you've got a time challenge, but it's not as apparent to people until maybe an Alan Scott is here helping them.
Yeah, and one of the examples of that is that the frustrations that I see sometimes in business owners where their team is not delivering what they would like.
Yeah, right.
What that then looks like is that the team doesn't understand that they've been empowered to do it, because you don't empower them or you don't allow them to do it, because this attitude of, I'll just do it myself. I'll just do it myself. Then the team gets into the habit of, well, you'll do it yourself. You'll do it yourself. And they won't take on those responsibilities themselves or those opportunities themselves. So there's a real wonderful opportunity of a greater engagement with your team and productivity of your team if you actually have someone, or if you've recognized it yourself, to say, well, I will let that go. I will invest the time, and it's okay to make a mistake and learn from that mistake. And let's learn and let's look at that mistake collectively and learn from it.
Just before you go on, how does that dynamic play out for team members?
Yep.
Like, what happens? What do you see as a fresh set of eyes coming into a business? And as Paula said, people are often blind to this. Like, they don't get it because they're too immersed in it, too close to it.
Yep.
We don't see it. But how do you see that dynamic playing out on other people who are impacted by, I have no time to invest in you, I don't make requests? I'd love to hear.
The first thing that comes to mind, Tony, is you sit in a room maybe where you're sort of trying to get some new ideas for the business to come out amongst your team. And you sort of go, right, what do you think? And there's just dead silence.
Crickets.
Yeah.
That's your phrase, right?
Crickets.
Yeah, but then there's dead silence because they're not used to that.
Yeah.
It's almost like, oh, hang on, I feel I'm under pressure here because you're asking me a question that you don't normally ask me. So there's a bit of a hand-holding process there. And if that same company that I talk about that's up on the Sunshine Coast, a good example is where they had about 7 or 8 people in their sales, customer service type teams. And there was 2 in there that were sort of that were apparent to be stepping up a little bit, if I can put it that way, with taking on more responsibility and ownership and ideas. So the idea was to actually work a little bit closer with those 2 and then almost use them as a demonstrated example of the way the business was shifting and allowing the empowerment and the delegation to work with those 2 people initially, and then showing that down to the other 4 or 5. And then bringing the other 4 or 5 along for the journey. Not so much the owner saying, you will do this. The owner sort of saying, look, I've been working with X and Y a little bit closer over the last couple of months. This is what we've done together. This is the process we've gone through. For me, so many things break down to something as simple as process and content. So there's a process involved in allowing the team to come with you. And even if you use a couple initially to sort of get them more empowered, what they do, how they, the outcome that they deliver is the content. But working through the process first and being very clear and demonstrate what that process looks like is such an underpinning success of engagement, for my opinion. So being able to step back and say, well, that's process. How we engage is process. What we engage with is content. Just trying to keep it very, very simple.
So you're really talking about taking a disengaged team to having them engaged.
Absolutely.
Ready for that next, whatever that is.
And in some examples, that getting that team to an engagement point, some might self-select.
Yeah.
That no matter what you do, they're not going to be engaged. And as that team then moves forward and the business improves, you might find that 1 or 2 people that are self-selecting not to be engaged, for example, either would like to be doing something else within the business or would like to be doing something else. So one of the benefits of that engagement process is that they might self-select. It'd be great if they don't, Great if they all come forward and the business, the throughput and the productivity sort of improves a hell of a lot. But quite often you see, well, I've tried this, I've tried this, I've tried this. Then the hard conversation comes up, well, maybe they just don't want to be here.
Yeah. So that's what you're referring to as self-select.
Yes.
I think what's interesting in what you say, it sounds like when you step in as the facilitator, that you reveal in some instances, and this could be tricky, the limitations of the leader themselves. That maybe they don't know that they're not delegating, or maybe they can't see that they're the actual person keeping the business stuck or holding the business back. How do you see that in your practice, and how do you manage that?
Do see it. So the first thing is absolutely. And it's about the conversation with the business owner who is doing that. It's almost like the question, what do you think it would look like if you did this? And how would you experience that? And, in the example I mentioned before, not only looking at those two people who are engaging a little bit more, but actually then coming back to the business owner and saying, well, how did that make you feel? What could that be? What could that look like for you going forward? So it's never a wrong. It's never sort of saying to the owner, saying you can't. It's about, what does that experience look like and how can you foster that more in yourself? What do you believe you need from a support perspective to help you do that? And you've seen some of the evidence already in what happens when you let go. Where else can you let go? And what else does that process look like? So it's, it comes back to process a little bit. So recognizing in them, or helping them recognize themselves that there's a slightly different way of doing it. And so much of this also comes back to listening for me. The most powerful skill that a leader has, in my opinion, is listening. So two things for me.
We would agree.
Is listening and space.
Yeah.
So I think leadership is about creating space. So creating space for the leader, but also creating space for the team to grow into something that they want to do, or to develop a capability that they may not have. So there's a strong relationship for me between leadership and space.
So Alan, to pick you up on that point. So 3 pain points that I'm listening to is that no time, don't delegate, and maybe not so much good as a good listener to leaders. They don't listen well.
Yeah, and they jump to their own conclusions quickly.
Too quickly. Yeah, right.
Yeah, without, people quite often think that questioning isn't that much of a skill, but it is. So, listening and actually then throwing the question back to explore that a little bit more, as opposed to, okay, I've heard what you said, I don't think that's the right way of doing it, or this is the way would I do it, or whatever. So it's allowing that conversation to fold, to evolve, if you like, so that there's an outcome that's jointly owned, which, funnily enough, comes back to facilitation, getting to a jointly owned outcome.
Well, we often say, Paula, that, if you're not listening to somebody, then you're not validating people.
Yeah.
And when we don't validate, we disengage. And when we have disengaged people, you haven't got any agency in that business or within the team.
I think what's being provoked for me in this conversation is the idea that we can get stuck in our listening. So we're not actually listening to what the other person's saying. We're listening to our already made up head. We call it an assessment. We've already made an assessment. We're already there, and we've already dismissed what's coming our way.
Yep.
And I think that the deeper you get into business, or as a business owner, the more habitual that comes and the more of a rut you find yourself in. Do you notice that? Do you notice that some of the people you work with, if they've been in their business for a long time, get stuck on a track? And if so, how do you help them out of that track?
The way that I see that is that, not only in business, but I think in most conversations, being humans, we make most conversations about ourselves. So you can start a conversation with someone, and as soon as you get the opportunity to say, oh, I've done that, or I know someone, or whatever, we turn that conversation around to ourselves. So the way you see that in business is, you listen almost to the first couple of sentences and you find something that relates to you as an owner, as a leader, and say, well, I can change that. I can do something with it, as opposed to listening to the overall conversation and seeing the big picture. And it does come back to part of the roles that I play is I might sit in a conversation like that without driving the conversation of being a part of it, but just listen to it, and just then remind, not almost to make the intervention there and then, but to make a note as the conversation happens with leaders and business owners and say, oh, can you remember when this happened? What would have been a different way, or how else could we have handled that? So you try not to expose the owner or the leader in front of their staff. And for me, it's a matter of letting that unfold, recognizing that there's going to be an improvement or there's going to be a way to change it, but then take the opportunity at the end of that conversation, sitting down with the leader as their own development, saying, do you remember this point in the conversation? How else could have that been done? Or if you did this, what would it look like? So I think that's a very good process to sort of almost mirror and reflect, or get them to mirror and reflect.
So they get to experience it, like experiential learning, rather than this is how you should do it. Rather than being told.
Great coaching piece too.
It is.
And one of the lovely things is when you work with couples.
Okay, we've got to say it now. So we've been working with Alan. Our dark, dirty secret is out. And it has been a true joy to actually have someone reveal our blind spots as a business and as a partnership. And there's one declaration. It was very difficult for us to separate the idea of what the business looks like in 10 years versus what our life looks like in 10 years. And we needed a third party to help us because we were also blind to that.
Yeah, hence why we engaged Alan.
Yeah. So, the joy is bringing this to the world, because if other people had the same opportunity, I'm sure they cocould be feeling that same sense of lightheartedness and action that we are in our business. So, dirty secret out. Carry on, Al. I think you were.
We could keep going down that dirty secret part. Yeah.
But I think you raise a really good point too, Paula, because we felt in our own minds and hearts that we knew what we were doing. Like we knew, but now we understand. Well, what is it that we actually know? Until you came along and sort of opened our horizons a little bit more, we go, oh, gee, we didn't actually think about that, because you brought new distinctions to us that we were blind to. And then all of a sudden that space of possibility opened up for us to go, wow, this is possible. So it took us out of our malaise, our resignation around that, I guess. And I'm wondering if other leaders, well, I'm sure other leaders, business owners feel exactly the same way. Get caught in their knowing, get caught in their rightness, their righteousness.
I suppose the process that we go through where you talk more about your own destination, if I can put it that way. Another wonderful business I'm working with, a new farm in Brisbane recently, is the female principal of that business. I'm conscious I'm not mentioning names, but female principal of that business. Her target is to sort of be on the world stage as an expert in her field, and behind that is writing 2 or 3 books. So between now and 2030, she has a target of writing 4 books, and she knows what the first couple of those topics are, but not sure of the third or the fourth. And when you talk about delegation and time, she's written the first one, but she now understands the time and effort taken and the space that is required to really dedicate yourself to actually developing that sort of asset, if I can put it that way, to a level where it is impacting as she wants it to be. So for her to have that time as an individual expert in her field, she needs the business to look a little different. And part of that is building up the management team around her and her husband coming in and actually taking on some of the responsibilities. But her measure of success is the time that she will then have available to write the books. That is a lovely back and forth to the business, because if you get that, you're on the world stage, you're actually being listened to as an expert.
Yeah.
That then falls back into this is the business, and the business then supports that, and she supports the business. But it comes to space. It comes to actually opening up that opportunity and being, and it was until she visualized herself as that expert globally, it wasn't until that she could actually see what was needed and what was possible.
Yeah.
What was needed for the business to look a little bit differently and bring somebody else at a senior level in to allow her to have that space. Yeah. And therefore what was possible not only for her but also for the business. Yeah. So it's a wonderful window to open.
Like a decoupling in a way, which is really difficult to do on your own.
Yep.
And so everyone needs some help at some point in time. What I'm thinking about is what happens for a business owner or business owners where they haven't, that they've kind of found themselves in a pattern of thinking about what they do so much. Might have been a bit like the Sunshine Coast gentleman. It was almost impossible for him to engage with the idea of his own vision or a couple's vision. Do you see that very often, that that leaders lose themselves to the business such that they haven't invested in that space for themselves? Do you see that?
I do, and I see it probably in 2 different ways. They might just have one vision and they don't see themselves there because the day-to-day says I've got to do X, Y, and Z. The other way I see it is, and again, working with another business at the moment that is a hotelier, or the son of a parents of who are running a hotel, has such a vision of where he wants to be himself. There's 4 or 5 different businesses that are underneath that he's moving those jigsaw pieces along at the moment. but doing it in a way where it's almost detrimental to him and to his health and to his stress and to his whatever. But there's a number of moving pieces. So each of those have their own business vision or business outcome to support their overall vision. So he's got his objective is to build an overall portfolio of hospitality and for him to hospitality and events. So for him to be able to do that, he's going to have to move a lot of those pieces, but also walk away to a certain degree from the major business to give him the time to do that. It comes back to space again. So you've got people on that sort of side from a vision perspective with multiple pieces. You've got on this side people who just have a fairly clear vision of where they want to be and just one business to get them there. That hopefully also is generating wealth and generating opportunity for them to actually fund their going forward life. And it's that connection that I quite often, and it's not that I saw it as what do you call it, brain surgery or whatever. I've had a couple of people saying no one else has talked to me about that. No one else has sat down with us as a couple or as a family and worked out where the family wants to be, because quite often it's not a couple, not a married couple. It's one organisation out there was a brother, a sister underneath a father, but a brother and a sister and a husband. So there was 3 of them working. And when you sat down and worked out why those 3 were in business, their fundamental reason for being in business was totally different. One was about property, one was about organics, and one was about international markets. And until you actually have, in my opinion, until you have that conversation and get all that on the table and say, okay, if we're going to do X from a strategy perspective, that strategy needs to service those 3 outcomes if you are going to run the business the way that you want a business and get to where you want to be, and be ready to call it out if a strategy doesn't support organics, as an example. But it's having that conversation up front, and quite often you pay mediator. You play arbitrator. And that's one of the things I love about working with small business or business owners or family business, because for you to be able to do that, there's a certain level of trust that's been built. You have to invest a lot of time in them and in the business and understand the business to get to that trust. But once that trust is in place and you can play that role, that's an incredible feeling, hopefully, not for me, but also hopefully for that business to have someone who can drop in, has the permission to hold them accountable, because you've jointly set where the business can be. And at the end of the day, it's their business. It's not my business.
I really like that. I like the story of the hotelier as well. But it's not all about strategy, Al, is it? Like strategy is such an important part, but where strategy exists, so do humans. And what I'm getting from you is that, yep, you've got to have your strategy, but then it requires the human being as the leader or the business owner to change. To shift their identity, to let go of their fears and step into that no man or no woman's land that we call uncertainty. Because, we're actually creating a reality from nothing. We have resources in place, sure. How do you work with people to help them make those transitions themselves, their shifting identity, working through their uncertainty and their fears and their resignations? Can you share a little bit about that?
The first thing that comes to mind with that is that you help them visualize what it looks like when they get through it.
Right.
So, when you talk about needing to let go or needing to delegate or allowing someone to step up and do something they've never done.
Which can be a frightening thing, right?
Which can be, particularly if they've done it and they've classically you work with businesses where they say, well, I've tried that before. It didn't work. Okay, now let's
Classic resignation.
Let's now unpack why it didn't work. Okay, and it comes back to the point about maybe it's the leader or the owner. But you try and spend a little bit of time saying, okay, what would it look like and how would it feel? So that combination between actually visualizing what it can be, but also then connecting that to what would that feel like for you or what would it offer you? And it takes a little bit of time to actually get them to visualize that, because in any, I suppose, change commitment curve, if you like, going through a process of understanding what we're talking about and then adopting or adapting it to your circumstance so that you can translate it into what you need it to be. That's the process that you try and go through, and saying, okay, if making it up a little bit, but if you allowed George over here to actually take on that ownership responsibility of something you've always done, sure, he may not get it right. He might falter. But what would it look like once he's done it a couple of times and you don't have to do it? Right? So again, with a agricultural business, about the owner was managing all the irrigation. So what does it look like if, in that case, his son? What would it look like if your son took that over? It frees you up to do something else about the health of the plant or something else in the farming side of things. But you might help him a couple of times and share that knowledge. And the wonderful thing about a family business, that's not just a leader and a person doing it, it's a father and a son.
Mm.
And giving them that opportunity to spend that time as a family unit and delegate in that family unit, that's a great outcome as well. And that's, I suppose, one of the things I love working with family business.
Yeah. So, just going back to the irrigator, what were some of the reasons, justifications, and the positions that fellow took not to delegate to his son to do the irrigation? Because this may connect well with many people, because hey, we're full of excuses, right?
In his example, I suppose, he also came back to what he loved.
Right.
So, and I'd say that in two things. He loved the health of the plant and all that sort of stuff, but he also loved the data. So watching the data, it was in conversation with him when there was ever a question that came up, oh, look, I'll show you that. I'll show you the data, I'll show you the report, I'll show you what's happened.
He's all over it.
He's all over it. And he's the only person that's over it at that depth, which is cool, fine. But to particularly to your question, I know where the irrigators are, I know what they're doing, I know what chemicals going in or what herbicide or insecticide or whatever they're putting through it. And he knows that down to that sort of level, and that's where he's comfortable. So it's not so much, in his case, letting go of a process that says irrigation. It's I'm going to let someone else look at the data and analyse the data. How can anybody do that to the level that I can, right?
Something that we hear often, Paula.
Yeah, and it's stepping them through it. It's not saying it's it's almost like not cold turkey. Just don't give it to them. Give it to them for a month and see what happens. Then you'll get the story. But I did that a few years ago and we lost X amount of dollars because it's a matter of stepping them through that. Comes back to process and content. What's the process you need to go and asking the question, what's going to make you comfortable? And the answer is not doing it. The answer is, well, how do we step this through where you feel that you're getting enough touch points or enough information to be comfortable that it's being done? So that the content or the outcome is that someone else is doing it. It just happens in that case to be your son. What a great relationship to build.
Succession planning, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be the bloodline. It can be your management team. It can be the next layer down. But it's almost allowing, back in the Deloitte days, I worked with a large business, not mentioning it, where they had a culture where they would send almost a broken machine to another division just to get it off their plate. And it was a matter that there was a culture of not making mistakes, where the culture changed almost overnight because someone came out and said, it's okay to make a mistake. It's not okay to make it habit forming, but it's okay to make a mistake. We'll learn from it.
How senior was that person that made, we call that a declaration, by the way?
Yeah, no, very senior, very senior. Came in and sort of really took over one of the operations, one of the geographic operations of a larger business, but just made it very clear that we're never going to send another broken machine to another division again. It's okay to put your hand up and say, I don't know. Put your hand up and say I made a mistake.
Risky in a business that doesn't have that tradition.
It is, and then it comes back to showing them it's risky that you're not doing that, but look what you're doing. And look at the outcomes of what you're doing, not necessarily for you, but whoever you've sent that machine to. All you've simply done is taken it off your plate without any resolution. How would it feel if collectively between those two sites you looked at and serviced and used machines between two sites? There's some efficiencies there.
Al, I've heard you a few times refer to process. And I'd really like to understand a little bit more about how you see process, because the way that I listen to you use that phrase, it sounds like practices, what we would describe as practices, leadership practices. And I'm wondering if there's certain practices that you see as universally applicable to the leaders that you work with. Now, for example, if we go back to the agricultural guy, that could be listening without opposing in the first instance as a practice, right? Because his tendency, by the sound of it, was to oppose as soon as something came up that was his turf or out of his comfort zone, oppose and hold it tight. But I'm really curious about some of the practices that you coach your leaders into to be able to evolve their business, to be able to step out of the way, to be able to be very clear about where they're heading. And I know that this is on an unexpected question, but it's just emerged in the flow of conversation. What do you see as some of the new practices that are very important for leaders to bring about in their way, what we call a way of being, the way they are as a leader?
One of the practices that come to mind, and not mine, it's something that I've seen done, I've done it, I do it, is right up front in a conversation about a topic, sort of saying, is this a topic where I'll make the decision, like I'm the leader, I'll make the decision, we'll make the decision, or you'll make the decision. And if you get into the habit of doing that at the start of a serious conversation or a major conversation, the person you're dealing with knows right up front that, okay, we're going to share information here. It's at a level where I still need to make the decision. And I'm going to walk you through how I've made that decision. Or right up front saying, look, we're going to share the information, we're going to look at it collaboratively. But at the end of the day, I expect you to tell me what you're going to do. So one of the techniques is being very clear up front about whether it's a my decision, our decision, your decision, and recognize the opportunity that forwards the person to say, well, we're going to talk about this collectively. I then expect you to come up with some solutions and make a decision if it's your decision. So that's a very simple technique for me to sort of say, well, before you go into that conversation, step back and say, okay, what do you expect out of this? And who's going to make that decision? And if you can see that the decision, isn't a 8, 9 or 10 impacting decision, and you can actually then allow the person to come up with some ideas and give them the opportunity to, or the empowerment to make that decision, be upfront about that. I'll help you through that. If I'm the leader, I'll help you through that process. But let's make no mistake about, at the end of this, I'm going to ask you what you're going to do. Or we're going to actually come up with an idea together, or I'm going to make the decision. So I think that's a very good technique.
Yeah, great practice.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, in our experience too, that it's unclear who the decision maker is in meetings. In different conversations. So that's a great little simple technique that will clarify that beautifully.
And I think one of the other techniques also in any meeting is that in a lot of meetings, you think you come to outcomes, but allowing 5-10 minutes at the end of the meeting and saying, okay, let's make sure we're all across what we have agreed to do, who's doing it and when they're going to do it, down to the level where we can articulate it to somebody else. So allowing that time at the end of any discussion to say, let's be very clear on what the actions are. But one of the pain points, if you go back to pain points, is that particularly if those conversations are strategic and to a certain degree tactical in nature, not operational, the other pain point is that you come up with too many actions. So that you know that they're almost never going to get done because the day after or the hour after or whatever, you're going to go straight back into business as normal or operations as normal. I would much rather see a business commit to 1 or 2 actions, get them done, celebrate the fact that they've got them done, and I talked about habitual before, get into the habit of execution. Even if it's just one thing at a time, but then get into the habit of nailing it, celebrating it, executing it, nailing it, celebrating it, and build that almost fiber in a business where they know what execution looks like, they know what outcomes look like, and they then get better at doing that. So you might take it from 2 outcomes out of a meeting to 3 outcomes to 4 outcomes, but over time, because they've got the process now in place where I realize what that looks like for me, I realize what execution looks like, but I also think critically that when they do execute, it's either a pat on the back or a celebration to say, well done. What else can we do now? But getting a business used to small wins and getting them into the habit of execution, I think is very, very important.
Can I share a dilemma? I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Something we're noticing inside the big organisations that we would tend to work with is executive diaries perpetually full. And I mean back-to-back meetings. And we see it as a symptom of an inefficient and ineffective organisation. Do you see that? And then what is a way that you tend to work with your leaders, if you see that, to be able to institute more like this? The habit of execution is what you called it.
I do see, and it's very prevalent in business owners that I'm so busy in my diary, there's no space in my diary. And to a certain degree, right up front, you have to accept that. So quite often what I say to them is, okay, well, whatever's in your diary, you're giving prominence to, you're giving priority to. So now let's look at what you're giving priority to. So analysing your priority to start with. And then and it comes back to their nature. If their nature is, I rely on my diary and I run my day on my diary, once you've then prioritised stuff that can come out of your diary, you use the diary as a tool. You use the diary as a structure and say, okay, well, if it's about strategic thought, treat it like a meeting, treat it like a client, treat it like a customer. So, maybe the afternoon of every Friday, every fortnight, it's about a strategic discussion. Put it in your diary and don't move it. So if you live your life so much by your diary, use that as a wonderful backbone to use that process to actually change the way that you do things. So, and, when I was living in Sydney and had my 2 boys as 7, 8, 9-year-olds, I diarise the fact that I coach them football. So from a 2:00 afternoon or to a 5:00 in the afternoon, I treated it like a customer, like a client meeting. So every week there was footy training, there was footy training, there was footy training. Because once it's in the diary, and particularly with a personal assistant, they know that if it's in the diary, you can't move it, or you have to have a conversation about moving anything.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the things that I did personally.
Can I do a big shout out to all of the PAs and EAs out there, because they're lifesavers when they're doing this job diligently, protecting the diary. And there are some excellent, I would say they run the business. Because they're prioritising, and if you could work with the agreements about what's a priority, how important is that? Do you get the EAs and PAs in on the act?
Not as much as I probably could.
They're what we call gatekeepers,
Yeah.
Alan, and it's good to have the gatekeepers on board.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Could I share a story? We ran into this dilemma the year before last, and last year we clawed back Mondays for team meeting days, because once we knew we set the team up on a Monday, then we could disappear into client land Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. What we realised last year is that's still not enough to do what we need to do as a business. So we've now cleared out Fridays, and we're only working client side Tuesday to Thursday.
Yep.
And it's all set up in the diaries already for the start. It's the 6th of January, and we're already ready to go. The feeling of having that is almost indescribable.
Yeah.
The feeling of having that space to dedicate to what's really important in the business.
Yep.
It's an experiment. We're yet to see that it comes off, but we managed to claw back Mondays. We can do Fridays.
I think it's a good example of, once upon a time we were run by the business, run by our diaries. Now we run the diaries.
Yeah.
We've got more control over that. And hence we can make better decisions for ourselves. We're not fatigued because our diaries were fatiguing us.
Yeah.
It's weird, isn't it? But that's what happens. We were fatigued by them. It was incredible.
I think it's a really good example, not saying that you are, but not to blame the tool. The tool being the diary.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you use a tool like that to the greatest effect? So, as I said, sort of diarising some of those softer things like coaching football or spending time to yourself, or again, the Sunshine Coast guys up here, when we sat down, and I'll throw you guys in this with some of our conversations as well, how much time do you want to pare back from the business? So I want to go surfing. Okay. And he does go surfing every morning, but his wife, and I'm very careful not to use the names here, won a surfboard, now wants to learn to surf. So what an opportunity for them to go doing that together. So put it in the diary on a Wednesday morning or a Thursday morning and put it aside for three hours. Yeah. And quite often their immediate response is, we can't do that because the staff will want to do it themselves. Can kind of understand that outcome, but generally the staff won't. The staff will appreciate that you are running a business yourself. You're running a business. So that time is about you, and you will turn up in that afternoon a more engaged, better, if that's the right word, leader in that afternoon, because you spent that time in the morning. And being upfront with why you're doing it and what that conversation is and what it takes to run a business, I think is a very, very good educational process for the staff underneath you, whether it's your management team or down on the ground staff, to demonstrate your commitment to business as a business owner and what it takes to make this a business that is successful over time, and even to articulate we do that because it's now supporting what we want to do as people. I think that's such a lost conversation between business owners and families about why they're in business. It comes to purpose and purpose, I suppose, and what that means to the business, and being upfront about that conversation, because at the end of the day, it demonstrates you're a person.
Yeah.
Al, we see this playing out also in big organisations. And the conversation that it revolves around is actually flexibility. So recognising the inherent need of the individual that's coming to fulfil the role every day. And we had this amazing experience of having this flex conversation inside a big construction company, and they're trying to foster and encourage this idea that you need to be a whole person when you're showing up to site or in the office, however that is. And there was an example of a construction worker coming to work, and he was a bit flat, and the manager noticed, and he said, "Hey, what's going on?" And he said, "Well, this new site's really disrupted my surfing pattern, and when I don't surf, I don't go well as a human being." And this beautiful young manager said, "Well, mate, is there a way that you could change your hours a little bit, and maybe once or twice a week you go for your surf in the morning, because I want you here being happy and on the job and thinking about what you're doing, because there are a lot of risks if you're not really in the zone.
Yeah.
And at first, when we started having this conversation, that was the joke scenario. A guy wants to go surfing, we should give him flex, and all the old guard were going, no, that's a joke.
That's not work.
Why should he surf? We should all be here at 6:30 in the morning. And but actually, we ended up finding that example at the end of our national road trip with this client, and it was so real. And it was so appreciated by the 40 other people in the room that heard the story. I think they all had a moment going, wow, why shouldn't we celebrate that we have to have recreation as a part of this footprint, no matter where we're at in the business? And particularly bringing the younger people into the business, we've noticed as well in our business that we support what they need first, because we get the most out of them when we support them as a whole human being. Do you see any of that playing out, the changing nature of the workforce over the last decade that you've been doing this stuff?
I have, both positive and, I was going to say negative, but still bound in the old ways. And when I say by the old ways, still needing to be able to see the person.
Yeah.
If you don't turn up at your desk, I don't know that you're working.
Yeah.
That's old thinking.
Yeah.
A mindset
It is.
challenge.
But where you're seeing it
History.
more positively now is in, and it's getting to a point almost where it's an overused word, but wellness
Yes.
and resilience.
Yeah.
And the further concept of that is the idea of buoyancy. So being able to respond quickly, but respond in the way that you want to, so that you're engaged in whatever that response is. And it could be a setback at work. How do you respond to that? It could be a celebration or whatever. But it's about understanding what that wellness might look like. And to your point, wellness might, rather than some businesses, and all due credit to them, yes, we'll have someone, they'll come in and do stretching classes, or you can go, here's your gym membership and go to the gym. But looking at what truly wellness is at the individual level, and it could be surfing, it could be, okay, find 3 people in the business that like surfing together and go and surf together. And we'll allow you to do that. Or you might go on an adventure hunt because that's what really excites you about. But it's still a get out of the office and do something that spiritually or physically engages you. So having in my opinion, the really forward-thinking businesses are looking at wellness at a wider level now, not just the flick and tick side of that, but actually truly understanding what engages the employee and allowing them to do that as part of their 9 to 5 or part of their 48-hour week sort of thing, so that they come to work refreshed on an ongoing basis, as opposed to having your 4 weeks off annual leave and hoping at the end of that you come back. Because quite often we come back even more tired.
Yeah.
And we're a break now after the end of the break, and it's been an interesting sort of exercise to work out how many people have come back to work today.
We were
a little bit more fatigued than they went away with.
It depends on the habits that you cultivate outside if you're going to have that break time.
Yeah.
Really. And just thinking about what you've been sharing there, it comes back to how you think things should be as a leader.
Yep.
And we call it a standard, and that often we don't even realize that we're hostage to our standards, that this is just the way work is.
Yeah.
Work is where you show up.
Can you explain a little bit more about standards?
A standard is really, I would describe it as how we think the world should be.
Right.
And it's something that doesn't occur to us as something that we're generating internally. It feels like a fact.
Yep.
And I'm going to talk about the old guard fact, because you said, if you're not at your desk showing me that you're doing your 40 hours a week, I actually don't believe that you're doing it.
Yep.
So the standard is a good week's work is 40 hours at the desk. I really perceive that is changing.
Yep.
And I perceive it's healthy that it changes. And I also think it brings up this idea that we need to cultivate trust.
Yep.
And it brings up new skills for leaders to be able to have different conversations to bring that about, so that if there's a concern about something not happening in that 40 hours, then that's the conversation you have about what's not delivered, not that the hours weren't spent at the desk. What are your thoughts about that? The importance of trust inside organizational cultures, and the need for leaders to understand the potential for them to be stuck in an old paradigm.
The first thing that comes to mind in that whole conversation around trust is being very clear on what the outcome is expected to be. And it's both from a leadership perspective, sort of saying, look, this is what I'm doing. This is what my outcome is to you. This is what my outcome to the business is. And use that to sort of then help from a process perspective. almost for every person that you're managing, the outcome that I expect from you is this. So let's be very clear on what the outcome is. How you get there, and this I think is the paradigm, how you get there is up to you. But if you can deliver that outcome and you can deliver it to these sorts of standards and be clear on what those standards are and what those measures are, because I still believe what gets measured get done. So being clear on the outcome, it allows, again, part of this empowerment, part of this delegation, it allows the staff to actually look at the best way that they can work to deliver that outcome. If you go back to the old paradigm, saying, well, providing you're here at 9 or 8:45 and you leave at 4:45 or 5 o'clock, I'm going to believe that you're doing the job with almost no definition of what the outcome should be. So if you can really have that constructive conversation about the outcome looks like this, or the product that you're producing looks like this, it opens up the opportunity then to have a collaborative conversation as how do we best get there? And, if you're an older manager, I suppose, or a leader, you might have a very set way that you think that happens. But being open to, call them millenniums, call them whatever you want, but just different thinkings and different ways and different uses of technology to get to an outcome more effectively, in a shorter time frame. If you have that outcome definition type conversation and then open up how do we get there as a collaborative or a collective discussion, it just opens up the opportunities of redefining your business process, in my opinion, or on changing your practices, changing the way that you use. And technology comes right into that, and how you can use data and apps or online stuff more effectively to be more efficient to deliver the same outcome.
So, Alan, it's been a wonderful conversation today, really looking at the pain points, processes, techniques and tools. For leaders who, might be a little bit stuck in their business, too close to their business, not making enough requests or delegations, not enough time, not listening well. But you're an expert. You've been in this game a long time, and you help businesses scale from where they currently are to where their aspiration is, from 3 million to 50 million or 100 million, whatever that is. And I believe that you're very successful, which is why we're engaging you. But there surely must be, once you have got the foundations in place, then there's a process that you must take teams or leaders through that really help them create that future that they are wanting, or maybe they don't even know that they want because they don't know how to get there. How do you get them there? How do you make them create that transition, where there are stuck traditional ways of thinking? They know they've got to go, but what are some of the tools and techniques you use to get them there?
Well, I suppose one of the first tools, I don't know whether it's a tool.
A conversation, right?
The more you put the customer, if you're in a traditional business where you're either making a product or servicing a market or servicing a customer, the more that you put the customer at the front of that and understand the world from their perspective and let go of whatever you're absolutely connected to. So if you're in a manufacturing business and you made a great widget and you think it's the best widget ever, unless there's customers that want it, unless there's customers that see that, the widget could be useless to a certain degree. So the design thinking process, reimagining what an outcome looks like, ideation, empathy. So empathy is another thing that I've seen the change in business. So both empathy and purpose. So where we've gone from mission statement to purpose statements, the empathy aspect now, particularly from customers, is empathizing with what the customer's journey is, where the customer resides, where the customer almost, the opportunity for the customer to find you in their life before they even know that they found you.
Yeah.
So you're getting on their radar almost subconsciously by understanding where they walk or understanding what their journey is. So to your point about getting businesses to think wider, is putting them in a room quite often with different levels of people in the business and getting them to be the customer or empathize what the customer is looking for either now or in the future. And how can you better service that going forward? So very much one of the tools is getting them in the customer state. And whether it's a customer empathy map, which I think is the greatest tool that's ever been created, to be honest, where you actually go through a process where you think about the customer. All due respect to the Explain guys who created it. But the getting you to sort of really structurally think through the customer from what they see, hear, say, and then getting down to the pains and the gains that you can offer them and the expectations that they have, I think is a wonderful tool to sort of get businesses to think forward.
And Alan, could I add too, is that while it's a tool, it's also a conversation.
Absolutely.
Different kinds of conversations that people might not be privy to,
yep.
that you introduce them to, that opens out new actions, new possibilities for them.
Yeah. I had a wonderful opportunity with a business a long time ago where we used that tool, the customer empathy map, and we actually got the customer in. So we had their client service team who supported this customer. And for the first 45 minutes, hour, the customer was almost told to say nothing, just listen. And I facilitated a conversation with that customer service team with the tool in front of the customer we were talking about as to what we thought they were thinking, seeing, saying, hearing, and what their pains and gains were. Comes back to trust. The trust that existed between that customer and the business was at a level where the customer was happy to do that and was prepared to do that. But at the end of that, we then turned around to the customer and said, well, how did the team go?
Okay.
And amazingly, the customer said, you got that right. I'm not thinking that, but I am thinking this. I'm not seeing this, but what I am seeing is this, and that's what it means to me. So using a tool, but to have a conversation that the tool supports, almost to be brave enough to have it in front of the very customer that you're actually trying to unpack.
Love it.
And the customer then coming back and saying, great, and they've now seen an hour of 4 people around the table for nothing, but invested in their business and the way they think. But then to come back and say, well, this is what I'm actually thinking. This is what my actual pain is. Gee, I hadn't thought about that. And you're the only guys that I've met who have actually put that in front of me. That's the conversation that's possible with empathy.
Yeah, beautiful.
And the other thing I'd say with that is that while we look at it, it's almost easy to understand how we might use a tool, with the customer empathy map from a customer perspective, but then switch it and use it as an employee empathy map.
Right.
So if you take your employees and what they're thinking, what they're seeing, what they're saying on yourself or on your own business, and what their pains or gains might be from an employee perspective, classically still you run these half-yearly sort of review processes with your staff. But to almost put yourself in a position where you're going through that employee empathy map, which is the same tool, same structure. You just switch from a customer to an employee.
Oh, that's powerful.
And you're going through what's in their head. What are they thinking, seeing, feeling, saying? And what's their pains or gains? Before you get into that process of review, you've at least put yourself as an owner of a business in their shoes. Just opens up a different perspective to have a conversation through.
Beautiful,
what a great
beautiful.
idea.
Yeah.
Okay, Paula, what's Alan's mood at the moment as he was talking through that customer empathy map?
Ambition, and I would say focused joy.
Yeah.
It was lovely to watch you you came alive. I can see why you love doing this. And
There's the passion, huh?
That's it. What I'm thinking about is, I know you're going to share with us a couple of other tools as well, and that people can find the customer empathy map on the internet if they look it up. Yeah, it's a visual, and they can start filling it out straight away and start thinking about their customers.
Okay.
When you facilitate this process, how connected are your customers to their customers in your experience? Do they know how to answer that to the depth that you expect that they should as someone that's advising them?
Not initially, no.
Yeah. And how do you help them regain that connection? Do they go and speak to customers? Obviously you've done this fishbowl. I call what you talked about a bit of a fishbowl technique where, how do you get them to re-engage? Because you can get lost. You can be running a business, and then you're running a business and you forget about the customer. Yep. Right? How do you help them re-engage?
One of the first things we do is sort of say, well, have you even recognised who your closest customers are? They may not be your biggest, but the ones that you would trust you the most. And then, getting that, when was the last time you had a really good conversation with them? When was the last time you actually talked to them about some of this sort of stuff? And before you actually then go and have that conversation, if you were to fill this tool out, if you'd use the tool in relation to what they're thinking, then go and talk to them. How close are you? And it's quite if someone's willing to identify one or two customers as their most beloved, if you like, and then you go through the process and they find that they're wildly different to what the customer's actually thinking, it's quite a slap in the face to say, you've said that this is your closest customer and you're not actually on board on what they're thinking. So that's a very interesting, very, very impacting way of doing it. It's also great to sort of use that tool from a customer perspective. And again, this is where the leadership almost lets go and gets other people in the room to actually populate that in front of them, because they might have a long-term view of the customer that's built up over a long period of time with that relationship that simplistically, the person who's engaging with that customer for the first time last week sees a difference, sees a totally different customer than you've known for 20 years. So being prepared to actually then generate that view of the customer from fresh eyes, still within the business, and then reflect on how you're now seeing it or how that's changed in your views, I think is another way of actually using it. And all you're really trying to do is refresh the priority that businesses have on thinking about their customers. So you talk pain points as well. One of the things that I don't see business do enough is treat their partners like their customers. So, you know, particularly with partners.
Rings a bell to us, Alan.
Well, partners, for me, you know, when we use another tool called the Business Model Canvas, we look at partners either as partners that can help you deliver your supply chain, do things or have things that you can use to deliver value. They're partners that actually can influence what your customers think, so they can be used as a channel, or they're partners that actually can work with you to enhance your own value proposition. You don't compete, but you're both trying to service the same customer. And if you did something together, it's the 1 + 1 = 5 scenario versus what you can do yourself. When we walk businesses through that, and we almost they find out that they've got partners that are supply chain support, influence customers, and can enhance their value. So what are you doing with them? You know, how are you managing them? You know, you're almost indoctrinated now with customer relationship management, but you're not indoctrinated with partnership relationship management. Because if you're going to go and tell a customer what you do, why aren't you then telling a partner? Why aren't you working with a partner to build a joint strategy, or to at least both share the strategy that you're both employing to service a market that you're both in? So I think there's lots of latent opportunities that exist in strategy and growth for business to open up that door more about the partners that they're working with and how they're utilizing that. And there's another thing called value realization, where it challenges you. If you were to reduce what you do and what you have, but still increase your value, how do you do it? And quite often, and in doing that, you generally reduce cost. So how do you do it is generally you're using a partner. You're doing something that's not your core, that they can do, or the partner can do, because guess what it is? They're passionate about it. Transport's a classic example. If you've got trucks in your own business and you're not passionate about your own fleet, handing that off to a logistics person who lives, breathes, dreams logistics is going to improve, no doubt, the value that you deliver to your customer, probably makes the fleet a little bit better and reduce your costs. So that's one of the things I'm seeing in business, where people aren't seeing the opportunity enough to manage the relationship and look at the opportunities from a business model perspective, from a service delivery perspective, from a channel perspective, to influence customers with partners.
So that business model canvas you've just referenced, that fleshes out that. Alan, can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, business model canvas comes out of a book called Business Model Generation that also has the customer empathy profile in it, written by a couple of guys, but Alexander Osterwalder is the guru, and I've spent some time with Alex, luckily. So it's a beautifully visual tool that allows you to understand effectively from a business why you make, or how you make money. So who do you service from a customer? What's the value proposition? How do you actually take that value proposition to them? And I'm doing this because that's the model. That's the model. What relationship you're trying to build to what sort of revenue can you build? That's called the value creation. On the other side, you've got what key activities do you need to have? What key resources do you need to have to deliver your value proposition? What partners can you work with to deliver that to your value proposition, and what is the cost? So there's 9 segments. It's a beautiful way to outline what a business does and how it makes money. It's a wonderful tool visually to play with, and how you might change your business model, even your pricing structure, the channels you might use, even the channels we look at from a life cycle perspective. Just because you've got a website doesn't mean that a client's going to engage with you. So how do they find you? How do they engage with you? How do they continue to engage with you? And how do you maintain the relationship on a long-term basis? And that whole conversation between the customer and the value proposition has been blown out even further in their second book, which is a value proposition optimizer, where it just looks in more detail at what is that relationship between understanding my customer from an empathetic perspective, truly understand what their pains and gains are, the jobs they want done, and how does my value proposition, my products and services relate to that.
I have a question around that. Al, how many of these business model canvases would you have facilitated for different companies over your career?
Probably 100.
100?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about it is, and I don't even know that Alex realized this when he put it together, was that we've used it for if you want to take a product to market. So you've got a new product to go to market. So who is it Who are you addressing it to from a customer perspective? What's the value proposition for that product? How do you take that product to market from a customer perspective to add what value to your business relationship? And what's the revenue that you expect to get from that product? And therefore, purely from the product release perspective, what are the activities and resources you need? What partners can you use to take it to market? At what cost have you got to cover? So you can use the same framework for so many different things. We also see it as a great succession model. So if you're either succession or if you're bringing in a new management team, what a great way to actually show them what the business is all about. We've also used it from a joint venture perspective. So if you've got two businesses coming together, who are the customers we service individually? Who are the customers we can service together? What's the value proposition for us individually? What's the value proposition for the joint venture? What's the key resources and key activities that each of us do individually? Who's going to be responsible for what? What can we do together? What's the partners we bring in individually? But what partners can we attract as a joint venture? So, you know, the same structure can be used for so many different purposes. And we find that the more that we use it within business, they start to think that way. They instinctively think about the relationship between value propositions and customers, or the relationships between activities and resources and partners and supply chain. So we try and indoctrinate the language as much as the tool. Because if you can indoctrinate the language, you indoctrinate the thinking, in my opinion. So it's a great tool to do that. It's one of those, again, it's a design thinking type tool, visual, get on your feet, post-it note it from a facilitation perspective. Remembering times up, we've done that up on big walls. It's fun to get everybody engaged. So it's a wonderful tool.
Wonderful. Business model canvas.
Customer empathy map.
Part of your offering. Is there, I think Paula mentioned another one that you might have as well.
The horizon model would be good to talk about. So I know that you use it perhaps in I am going to say a more advanced way than what you see on the internet. So could you coach us through when we might be thinking about bringing that tool or process to life as a business owner, and what kind of value we would expect from rethinking our business using something like the horizon model?
So just very briefly, the horizon model is a tool, but it's probably more of a thinking, where to have a business that's sustainably good, if I can put it that way, profitable over a long period of time, you have to think across things across three horizons. And horizon is now. So foundational horizon 1 is what you're doing now. Horizon 2 is, in my language, what you're going to do next. And horizon 3 is the future. And the way to think about it is that it's written up in a book called The Alchemy of Growth. It comes out of McKinsey's. But 70 to 75% of your thought effort, your effort always goes into horizon 1. So it always recognizes from a strategic perspective that you need to have healthy foundations in your business. And you need to have what we term the right to grow. So for you to bring in new stuff into your core business, the core business needs to be at a point where it's healthy enough to absorb that. Because quite often, if you try and bring something innovative in, something new in to a business that's fundamentally broken in some way, you actually will either not achieve what you could achieve, or you'll have some detrimental impact on the current business because it's not healthy. And horizon 3 is about, theoretically, it's about market making. It's something that no one's ever done before. The way that we use it, or the way that I've used it, is, you know, even from a time perspective, horizon 1 could be the next 12 months. Horizon 2 could be the 24-month window. Horizon 3 could be the 36, 3-year window, or even the 5-year window. But things are happening so quickly now that 5 years.
It's a long time.
It's a long time.
It's a long way out.
And this is what I work with, is horizon 1 needs to be what the business, in my opinion, is comfortable with. So if they believe they've got a lot to do, and if we use even this timing, if I have a conversation with someone tomorrow and says, okay, are you more comfortable in looking at what horizon 1 looks like between now and the end of this financial year? Let's see horizon 1 like that. And let's see what we can do in that horizon or those foundations between now and then.
So in this instance, that would be a 6-month horizon 1.
Yep. If I suppose I try and plug into the rhythm of their business. So if they're very focused on that as a rhythm and they just want to look at the 6 months, make horizon 1 that, because that's where they want to focus. Comfortably, I suppose now, if you get that idea of the horizon 1 being now, horizon 2 being maybe 24 months, horizon 3 being longer, we even simplify that further with the concept of now and next. So what do you need to focus on now? And what does that look like? And what could you focus on next? And getting back to this point about being good at execution, you might have a whole stack of stuff that's in that next window or that next horizon, but none of that should come in until you've nailed now. until you've actually delivered what you committed to around now.
Yeah.
So in a very simple business sense, getting the thought process around what's now and next, we've got to get the right to do next.
Yeah.
We've got to earn the right to do next, and we earn that right by executing well and doing the now. And it's almost on a visual perspective. We don't drop anything down from the next into the now until something goes away from the now.
Sounds like a terrific conversation to get people's head out of that first horizon trough that we can get completely lost in, which is going back to the beginning of our conversation. And then to really get them to think about, oh, gee whiz, what is next for us? You know, and then into that third horizon. Wow.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm sort of sensing now too that these three models that you've introduced, these three different conversations, they all interconnect with each other. They're not separate to each other, but they're all part of a conversation, right? About transformation and moving an organisation or business owners on to that next level.
It's a really nice connection for me because you know, you can almost put the customer in the center of it.
Yeah.
But the business model canvas is not strategy. It's the execution of. So it's taking something out of strategy and working out how you're actually going to do it. How does a business model need to respond to it? How does the market, how do I address the market? But having said that, if you really truly look at Horizon 3, and when I did the training in London with Alex, we actually talked about this, that if you've got all these things that are truly market making in Horizon 3, how do you actually distill that? How do you actually choose what you're going to focus on? Doing the right-hand side of the canvas, the business model canvas. So if I've got an idea in Horizon 3, so who's the customer that's going to, what's the market, what's the customers going to want that? Can I articulate the value proposition? Do I know how I'm going to take that to the market to generate what sort of revenue? If you can at least answer those 3 or 4 questions for brand new ideas that might sit in Horizon 3, you're starting to actually use it as a bit of a filter. That you might have 10 ideas out there. You might run a quarterly day brainstorming what's possible, what you've never done before, which could be an activity for Horizon 3. Out of that might come 15, 20 ideas. So how do you actually get that down to 5 or 6 you might spend some more time on? You might take the canvas and say, we're just going to populate the right-hand side of the canvas, which is customer value proposition, channels, relationships, and revenue. And if I can do that for 15 of those 20, and out of that 15, I can see where it can really work for 5 or 6 of them, that might be the filter that I use to bring it down. Then you might actually throw the customer empathy map in and say, okay, let's test that by actually understanding what customers are going to want for that, what customers are going to respond to that. So those 3 tools work really well together.
Let's begin, the last 5 or 10 minutes of our conversation. But if people were interested to engage with you, Alan, how would they do that?
They can contact me on email or by phone. And I suppose my commitment with them is part of osmosis. If we go right back to why osmosis is, it's a matter of investing time and understanding them first. Right. So whether that's a 30, 40-minute upfront conversation, whether that's a visit if they're in my back door, but getting to know them, getting to know their business and investing the time in actually starting to build that trust, I suppose, without immediately turning the cash register on or whatever you want to say. It's a matter of we both need to be aligned with understanding who we both are and what the businesses are trying to achieve. Okay. That's very important to me.
Beautiful. So there's an offer there, 30 to 40 minute conversation
whatever it needs
with
to
you.
be. Yeah, whatever it needs to be.
Either in person or over one of the technologies like Skype or Zoom. Okay, that's wonderful.
And contact details?
alan.scott at osmosis. So osmosis is ASMOSYS. .com.au.
Yep. Great. And would you be so willing as to put out your mobile telephone number as well? Meaning that is an Australian prefix, which is +61, and then over to you.
It's 414-527-738.
And if you're in Australia?
It's 0414-527-738.
Excellent. And it's really generous, Al. I like the way that you've said, look, as much time as you need, but, for anyone that's out there that's going to make this telephone call, please respect that, an hour of Alan's time is a very valuable hour of time. If you can imagine that this is something you just need to be mindful of.
Yeah, and taken advantage of too, because if you're one of those leaders or business owners who have connected in any way with our conversation with Alan, then we would encourage you to reach out to Alan and see what's possible, see what emerges from that conversation, because you know what? That's how we can take our businesses forward, by beginning to be in these rich, positive conversations for possibility. Alan, it's been a wonderful conversation with you. We've valued our time with you. Closing comments, and then I'll flick over to Paula to close.
This has been an amazing conversation, actually. It sort of reinvigorates me to a certain degree in some of the things that I've talked about. And it's a reminder at the start of this year in 2020 as to why I do what I do. And that is about sort of being close to sort of helping people achieve not only what their business vision is, but more importantly, what their life vision is, and sort of coaching them or helping them get there. So it's actually been revitalizing, if you like, for me, which is tremendous. So thank you very much.
Well, we experienced that revitalizing in the way that you brought your conversation to life. So thank you, Alan. Paula.
Yeah, I also want to say thank you, and I'm really looking forward to spending more time across the next 12 months together, not just with you working with us in terms of osmosis stewarding Liberated Leaders, but in terms of us sharing our practice by you being a part of Liberated Leaders this year. I can't wait to see what comes of that, because even in this conversation, something special has emerged. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks.